Welcome very much to Conversations. A pleasure to welcome to the program a dear friend of mine, being Johnanne Winchester. She is a veteran, a person of deep concern and intellectually relevant concern with improving the human condition. And Johnanne, so good to welcome you to the set. Welcome to MNN.
Thank you, Harold. It's always an honor.
Yeah, and on our far left is Claire Bulger,
Yeah.
and she's with the Earth Institute of Sustainable Development Solutions Network at the Columbia University. That would be Jeffrey Sachs.
Yes.
And that's a major institution, and she's there. She's his special assistant, I guess. So welcome so much, Claire.
Thank you for having me.
My great good pleasure. Maybe we could kick it off. We got a whole 58 minutes. We have a little clip that we want to show somewhere in the show. But Johnanne, why don't you share just a little bit of your own background, and then let's see how you, with all of the work you've done over decades, became interested in and involved with Claire and with the people at the Institute at Columbia. But share a little bit of your own background, if you could, please, as a waiting
Well,
kind of exercise.
I just celebrated my 29.5 birthday. So the decades.
You and Jack Benny.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, he was 39.
He was 39.
Right,
You're
so,
right. Yeah,
but
right.
I'm discovering that one of the keys to staying, as you well know, to keeping the mind young and resilient is working with other generations, both seniors and those that are coming up who are going to inherit the earth, and what we do or don't do together. So I have worked in and around as a consultant to the United Nations systems for many years.
Communications Coordinating Committee for the UN.
Yes, communications.
First ever NGO about the United Nations, started by Buckminster Fuller and Margaret Mead, if I'm not mistaken.
And Dr. Harry Lerner came aboard. He was a friend and mentor of ours. Ruth Steinkraus-Cohen, who initiated the whole hospitality.
And the UN Day up in
right.
Westport.
That's right. So the evolution of the UN is part of what I've been privileged to observe. And the evolution of the relationship to certain major educational institutions, such as Columbia University, which was probably there at the very beginning of the UN, and there are others. But so the symbiosis of the ongoing work of seeing how to end the scourge of war forever, which is right there at the beginning of the founding of the UN, and then looking at how to the big discovery that you can't end war without development, elimination of poverty, and then, oh my goodness, from environmentalists clashing head on originally with developers till they finally got around to synthesizing sustainable development.
Right.
So that is a bridge right now. The other hand, clapping is what was originally called global warming. Then it became climate change. Now we've evolved to climate variability because we don't know what's going to happen. It's not a steady warming situation. And so that's part of the pioneering work of the Earth Institute, as I understand it, at Columbia University. It was founded as one of the very first truly out of the silo, cross-disciplinary, cross-cultural experiments in the evolution of human consciousness.
I think that's a wonderful lead into our other guest. And maybe you could share your own background briefly, and then also the Institute and
Absolutely.
So forth. Please.
Well, I personally grew up right near Columbia University, and so was inspired by a lot of the work happening there. And then after graduating with a degree in history, I went to work for the Earth Institute and for Professor Jeffrey Sachs, who directs the Institute, and have really been privileged to work for him and to work with and around all the incredible scientists and researchers at the Institute. And the Institute works on the interconnections between human systems and earth and environmental systems. And so there are about 850 people encompassing researchers, professors, postdocs, and doing a lot of cutting edge research on climate change, climate variability, earth science, a lot of work on poverty alleviation, economic development, and as Johnanne so wonderfully described, thinking about the interconnections between all these things, because you can't solve one problem alone.
Is that people at Columbia, 800, or is that
Yes.
across the world?
No, at the Earth Institute.
At the Earth Institute is what I meant.
Most people are based at Columbia
Yeah,
in New York.
they are,
People
okay.
are working all over the world
Yeah, I
in
would think,
partnership,
yeah.
and Columbia has 8 global centers around the world
They
that
do,
are
okay.
research institutions. So we work closely with colleagues in Nairobi, in Mumbai, in Amman.
And does
so-
the 800 number include those people, or is that
No, it doesn't.
additional people that are involved? And there's quite a few people of significance that are around the world that has a
Yeah, I
connection
think-
to the Institute.
Exactly.
Do you have any numbers along those lines?
I
or-
unfortunately don't
No,
know
okay,
what the
fair
global
enough.
reach is, but there are a lot of wonderful partners throughout the world
Yeah.
and across different institutions.
And it's largely inspired by Mr. Sachs. I think he's been very, very prominent in terms of policy and so forth, or
Certainly,
intellectual
there are a lot of
understanding. Yeah.
There are a lot of intellectual leaders who we're privileged to work with at the Earth Institute. Jeffrey Sachs is the director and has done a lot of cutting-edge research, and truly, I think, is an interdisciplinary thinker himself,
Yes,
and so has been leading or setting the agenda for a lot of the work on
Yeah.
poverty alleviation, development, and the environmental efforts.
We could talk a long time on that, but his
Certainly.
background was in political science.
He's an economist.
Economics. Yeah.
Yes, so he started off as an economist.
Yeah.
He first became better known advising the government of Bolivia in the 1980s on ending hyperinflation, and then he helped to devise Poland's transition plan from communism to capitalism in 1989, 1990.
And also Russia.
He did some work
Yeah.
in Russia.
Uh-huh.
I think he did some amount of work in Russia, but not for very long.
That was a
And,
huge development, was it not? The implosion of the Soviet Union
Certainly.
was a major event in modern experience. Yeah.
Certainly, yeah. And so then in 2002, he had been working at Harvard, and he left and came to Columbia and became director of the Earth Institute. And he also is special advisor to first UN Secretary General Kofi Annan, and now to Ban Ki-moon on the Millennium Development Goals.
Okay, very good. That's all very good and important
And
work.
we
so-
also
yes,
should
dear.
mention,
Yeah.
because most people, when they hear about the Earth Institute, know and have seen and heard Dr. Jeffrey Sachs. But there's also Stephen Cohen. You might mention what he does, and
Yep.
Peter also.
Yeah, so Peter Schlosser, the director of research, Steve Cohen, who is the executive director, both are doing a lot of cutting-edge research as well on earth science, and also translating it into policy. They're leading a lot of incredible education efforts. You can now get a PhD at Columbia in sustainable development.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So is there a Department of Sustainable, or is that part of the
That's part of
Economics
the Earth.
Department?
No, it's
How
part
did
of the
they
Earth
group
Institute.
it together?
It's under the Earth Institute, and
under
so
the Earth Institute.
I believe the way the
multidisciplinary.
program works is that you need to have an advisor from the physical sciences and one from the social sciences as part of your committee, and so there's an undergraduate major in sustainable development now. So at all levels of education at Columbia, the Earth Institute has been running some really fantastic educational programs.
Sort of a sidebar thing. That's so important, that work, and trying to get at a
Yeah.
comprehensive interdisciplinary understanding of things, pattern recognizing. Are there other institutions that exist, say at Stanford or other that sort of in a sense mimic or are sister institutions that are part of the same area of concern?
Evolutionary path, basically.
Or
Right.
that you relate to. What I'm trying to get
Yeah.
at is a way of getting patterns of people who are interested in the same field can be in touch with one another and get a synergistic resonancy,
Right.
something more than the sum of the individual researchings and so forth.
Right. There certainly are. I'm not
No.
sure which to name off the top of
Yeah,
my head,
right.
but there are obviously a lot of wonderful institutions around the country and the world, and
Yeah.
who we partner with on certain projects often.
Yeah, and the United
Yeah.
Nations close connection.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
Through
and that's with Ban Ki-moon, as you say, and then the institutions at the UN itself.
right.
Well, you're at a place of great interest.
It's an exciting time.
Do they pay you for that, being there at that thing? I should
They
think you'd
pay me
them
some,
for
and
the
then
honor of being there.
they pay me in knowledge and the ability to be around such incredible
Oh,
coworkers.
right. Good for you. Anyway,
Yeah.
you richly deserve. You did in history, and you said it was funny. You said a lot of history. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, what I see
Yes, dear.
is that it's really an evolutionary vision that has brought this Earth Institute into being.
Yeah.
I believe Jeffrey Sachs was the youngest tenured professor at Harvard.
Yes,
something
he
like that.
was tenured at age 28.
In economics.
Yes.
And he left that position to come help found this. So that says a great deal about both the vision of Columbia University, the vision and the commitment of Dr. Jeffrey Sachs and his colleagues.
Yeah. And they have at Columbia, I'm a member of a couple of those university seminars.
Oh,
They have
great,
university seminars that are outside of the curriculum, you
Right.
know, and everything. But they've got so many interesting things of people that are drawn just by pure interest. We have one in terms of technology that we belong
right.
to. You know,
I have come, yes.
Yeah, you've been to those. Yeah, Columbia is a major center.
Oh,
of,
it's an exciting place, and the president Lee Bulger is really an incredible visionary, I think, and has
and that they
been
make
very
so much
supportive and-
available free to the public. You
They
can get on
do.
the mailing lists of various colleges and institutions, and they make classes available to come and sit in. You don't get credit, but they make certain special events available. I get the Earth Institute newsletter every
That's
week.
right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I get that too. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's a
Gotta come
major.
to some events.
It's a major resource up at 116.
Yeah.
Are you in competition with NYU, or what's the thing? What's going on? Those are two major institutions. Then we have the New School, and we have Baruch, and we have others.
Honestly, I think New York can support it. I think there's no limit on the amount of knowledge and engagement we could have. So I think it's fantastic having such a rich intellectual community in New York City.
Yeah, it's interesting. And then are they linking up at university? I got a friend, Bob Ashford. He's coming to town.
I know.
You're going to be in touch.
Sure.
Yeah, he's a lawyer, a law professor and everything, and they got institutions that are linking up on economic theory. It's maybe a sidebar. Jeffrey, he was economy. Is he associated with any of the major figures that help create what's called the canon of economic theorizing, like, say, Lord John Maynard Keynes or Schumpeter, or who was he a Keynesian? Was he or maybe it's not fair for me to ask.
Yeah, I'm actually not an economist myself. I don't think he would describe himself as a Keynesian, but I'm not quite sure what he would describe himself as. I guess he stands alone.
Agent.
Evolution. So he's maybe graduated from a relatively narrow. It can be very narrow. Any discipline can be very narrowly
Absolutely.
focusing on special parts of a particular thing, but he wants to take a more comprehensive systems approach to understanding, I would assume, right? And that's what the Institute's about. I think we need more of that, don't you? Rather than highly reductionist specialization, which seems to be the mark of much of higher education, seems to me.
And I think that everyone knows that you need an interdisciplinary approach and that problems don't exist in a vacuum and it's all symbiotic, but it can just be difficult to actually put it into practice.
It seems to me, I did all the work at university and all that, became a professor and all that, but it seems to me it's just galloped toward highly reductionist specialization as a way for the the educational process at higher levels has gone.
But that's part. Do you remember one of our favorite terms from Bucky Fuller, the trim tab?
Oh, yeah.
The little rudder on the big ship at sea that helps the big rudder turn against all those tons of water. So
that's on his tombstone. Call me Trim Tab.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And we just did a program with Allegra, his daughter.
Yes.
And she said that's on his tombstone.
Oh, my heavens. I didn't
Do you
know
understand that term, or the concept of the trim tab?
I
You have a great big ocean
yeah.
liner going through, that's the American world economy. Great big thing. And the rudder, it can't turn that big rudder to make the ship. They have a little thing in there that goes and sets the thing going, and then you can turn it. But there's a little
trim tab.
So that's an interesting. That's where an idea.
So in some ways, the Earth Institute is like a trim tab of a planetary educational system, if I may be so bold.
Right.
As to make that statement.
It well might be. Yeah, and anything that brings in Mr. Fuller, I think, is good for. I'm prejudiced to that. Did you have a particular take in history? There's a lot of it. Were you American history, constitutional history?
I studied British colonial history in Africa.
So really?
Very, as you said, the specializations.
British colonial, so it'd be East Africa and,
I focused on West, but a bit of background in East as well.
So that kind of set you up for watching the evolution of the Millennium Villages.
Exactly.
Maybe we should mention
what the Village? I don't know.
There's so many, something leads to another.
Yeah, we got to show some of the literature. Go ahead,
Yeah, absolutely. So Professor Sachs, he's the special advisor to the Secretary General on the Millennium Development Development Goals. And in 2005 and 6, he directed a project for the UN called the UN Millennium Project, where they brought together some of the world's leading scientists and academics to put together some more practical recommendations of how countries could actually achieve the Millennium Development Goals to end poverty and disease. And out of that work that they did, Professor Sachs decided to implement it, basically. And so he runs a program that works with Columbia University called the Millennium Villages Project, and it has 10 villages across 10 different countries in sub-Saharan Africa, where there are simultaneous interventions in different sectors, including health, agriculture, environment, infrastructure, water and sanitation, education, ICT for development. And so the project covers 500,000 people total and it started in 2005 and it will go through to 2015, when some of it will be transitioned to local and national governments. And the idea is to demonstrate how the integrated approach to development can achieve the Millennium Development Goals.
Oh, well, that is important if it could be. That would be a trim tab, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, right.
And
right,
I think they figured out something, correct me, at the level of $100 a year per person in these villages could transform, or at least really initiate the transformation.
I think, it's about $120 per capita per year in the villages is the budget. There are some slight specifics, but it's around there. And so about...
You mean they get that money to the people there? Is that what you're saying? I can't understand quite the...
That's what the costs of the project breaks down to on a per person, per year basis. So it's not all directly to individuals. A lot of it goes towards building roads, strengthening local clinics, buying medicines, et
restoring soil,
Is that private
water.
or public sector, or is there governmental intervention in
Yes,
that?
absolutely. It's in partnership with the local governments, governments.
What about here? Or people in the United States, or people that are involved?
Well, there are partnerships with UN agencies. There are there are a lot of public-private partnerships.
So there's private sector entities that are involved in that, corporations.
There are. So the Novartis company, which is a pharmaceutical company, has been a partner. Sumitomo Chemical is a company that has donated a lot of long-lasting insecticide-treated bed nets to help prevent transmission of malaria.
That's really important against malaria. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, and such a small investment for big return. Yeah.
And they last for years, and that has started to become. There was a big dispute over whether or not bed nets should be given out for free versus paid for, et cetera. But now I think the conventional wisdom is really mass-free distribution in order to cut down on transmission, and so that's been scaled up in Kenya and across the continent and has had a lot
great. That's interesting in terms of healthcare and things like that, and also what informs it. Also, you mentioned is private sector. One of the big questions confronting mankind is what's the relationship between we have on one hand we have private sector entities and we have public sector entities. We have government and we have private sector. And you said that there's a combination in there of private sector and public sector participation. Is it not maybe something that I guess we have to just give up on saying the dream of some who said we can wipe out the public sector? There's some people that are on the far right who said we don't need any government at all. We can just do it all. You understand that we do need. Naomi Klein even says we need. Who is the critic? We need a mixed economy. We need public sector, we need public sector, and how those two can work together is a major area of responsibility for responsible thinking policymakers, don't you think?
Yes, absolutely.
As a pattern.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't think you can go without either the public or the private sector, so we have to think about how they can work well together.
Yes, sir.
Remind us that we need public, private, and philanthropic partnerships. Because you do need the spontaneous gifting and the angel donors, the angel investors.
Well, you see that in a league by itself, you think?
It sort of gets forgotten because it took a long time to go from, for instance, at the UN, where it was a very tightly held member nation club. And it was over the years with people like Dr. Harry Lerner and the Communications Coordination Committee for the UN and many other organizations pushing that line in the sand, and then Ted Turner's historic donation. $1 billion of AOL.
Saved the UN, maybe.
Well, I don't know about that, but it definitely opened things up
Yeah.
to public-private partnership and civil society partnership in the evolution of the UN, both participation and policy making and so on. So
how do we divide it down? How much of whatever is going to happen and be happening in the world and so forth is legitimate or more efficiently in the private sector? How much is in the public sector? Where does it come down in terms of our political leadership?
can I come up with
And
what-
how is it measured? Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I believe that Mother Nature,
All right.
Gaia, planet Earth,
I like Lovelock.
right,
Yeah.
and is saying, all right, humans, I've been providing for you all this time, but guess what? You're sort of missing the point, which is that we're a synergistic, symbiotic relationship. So I like to remind people that a dead planet is bad business, and we are headed toward the tightrope, the cliff right now, watching the dead spots in the ocean grow, watching the pollution of the waters in our rivers from the kinds of petrochemical-based pharmaceuticals we use, or hair products we use, or many different things, not managing the stewardship of the very precious resources that we have. Luckily, I think institutions like the Earth Institute, United Nations University, the Impact Program at the UN, which is a network also of educational institutes. And I think one of the big missing elements have been more responsible use of commercial media to help carry the story. I heard Jim Hansen, who was he was probably the first or one of the pioneers who saw through the satellites, working with the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, global warming coming. He recently quit his job because he said, I really cannot criticize a government who's paying my salary. So he quit his job with NASA. He's now at the Earth Institute.
Yep.
And
He's at the Institute.
Yes,
is he?
and
A
he's-
major voice on climate.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just this past week or so, he issued a report. Jeffrey Sachs and about 10 or more other very prominent researchers are part of that report. It's basically saying we're going to do our best to give you the data you need, the knowledge you need, hopefully the wisdom you need, so that if you as planetary citizens, as global citizens, have to do a class action suit against your governments by not being more proactive, because your children will not have a future if we do not change what we're doing.
Against the governments and leave out of the equation the
Governments
CEOs
and the big
of the major
corporations, of course,
Well,
but the governments are not
Yeah, but we
calling
were-
those CEOs to task
Well-
because of the way our very corrupt politics is
Well,
set
that
up
gets
now.
into it. Finance reform,
That's right.
Citizens United, a whole lot of issues
That's right.
about this private sector, public sector dialectic and so forth.
So,
yeah.
and all of that looks like a tar baby that it would just be impossible to deal with, except that there's a light on the horizon, which is part of what we wanted to talk about today.
Yes, by all means, yeah.
So I wanted to just,
You want me to hold this
Yes.
up? Okay, here's the thing. Maybe, yeah, there, it's right there. Okay. This entire, go ahead, talk to it.
yes, so this is a recent Bloomberg Business Week cover story. This entire country is about to be wiped out by climate change, and then it says it won't be the last. So, and that company they're talking about is the
Bring it
drowning
back
of,
up as you can. Thanks, Ed.
the drowning of Kiribati.
What's Kiribati? Is
So
that an island?
Kiribati is a small island nation. Yes.
Uh-huh.
But I am an official Hurricane Sandy refugee.
Yeah.
Really?
So I know what it's like to experience directly the Jersey coast and much of Manhattan experience exactly what
It
they're
was a
describing
mess.
there.
It was a real
It
mess,
was.
yeah.
And you would think that more enterprises and entities would have had the big wake-up call. I mean, they still haven't finished rebuilding Lower Manhattan from this. And so as I celebrated my 29th and a half birthday, something kicked in, which was
Zeroing it on 30, huh? Yeah.
very.
You better start developing a little bit of a different. No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Hair dye, I don't.
Yeah.
So But that pollutes the water, so that's part of why I don't do it. But you solved that problem for yourself. I think it's just that you want to look like Bucky. You know, you're channeling Bucky.
Bucky was my hero. Yeah,
mine also.
Yeah.
So about a decade ago, I believe, the then king of Bhutan, who was, I believe, a practicing Buddhist, and Buddhism, among other things, is about the cultivation of happiness. The human condition doesn't make it easy for people to be happy, especially with money as God in so many parts of the world. But somehow this man of wisdom not only told his own country, which is a small country that waves at Nepal and waves at Tibet, across the Himalayas, one, you have to go and become a democracy to be a modern 21st century company. And my understanding is that the people said, but we love you. We don't want to be a democracy. We love you. And he said, well, that's fine, but you can't be sure that future kings will be benevolent. So you must become a democracy. Then he began to say, we need the gross domestic product, gross national product, which is based on growth, is not a sustainable economic center point.
And yet is used universally. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. And so then he somehow, through the UN, I don't know the story, maybe you know this story, came up with the idea that we should have a new economic paradigm.
Okay, let's hold another one. Yeah, thanks, pal.
That's based on well-being and happiness. And well-being for me is sort of like the horizontal, and happiness is like the vertical axis. Well-being, which would get you down to the water quality, the air quality, the water quality, the health of your country, the health of your people, the health of your economy. So that particular book, it represents a high-level forum that happened at the United Nations in April of 2012, where ministers and people came in, leaders of countries from all over the world, to support the idea of well-being and happiness as a new economic indice.
I think that might be a good lead into Claire, maybe to talk about another thing, which is the World Happiness Report. Is that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Please then. Thank you for that. That's the idea of happiness is a major.
I'm gifting you with this because you need this for your library.
Oh,
this
my
is
Lord.
not online. This is a very special
Thank you. I'll put it
document.
right over here, right next to my book bag. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And maybe,
absolutely.
should I show this now, or do you want to talk
to it? Well, I'll talk about it for a minute.
Okay, talk about it.
Yeah, so Johnanne gave a great introduction to the idea, and Bhutan has done some really pioneering work on trying to measure gross national happiness or have that be an end goal as opposed to solely gross domestic product. And so my boss, Jeffrey Sachs, had become interested in the idea and has started to do a lot of academic work on it. And at a small conference in Bhutan in August 2011, the Prime Minister, thinking ahead to this UN meeting, asked him and two collaborators, professors Richard Layard and John Helliwell, who are also experts in the field, to, the three of them to put together a report for that UN meeting. And out of that was born something that's now called the World Happiness Report.
So they put together a way of trying to measure it, or to describe what it means, or did they set and okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so all of them. So the World Happiness Report, I guess we can show now.
Yeah, I can show it now. This is the way it looks,
Yeah, so I think
the publication.
There's sort of three keys or three prongs of the World Happiness Report, and one is what makes people happy, just trying to understand that, and that's also a very interdisciplinary question, and a lot of things contribute to that. And then it also focuses on how would you measure how happy people are.
Absolutely. How do you? Do they explain how they go about trying to measure that?
Well, so what the report...
Open it and
idea.
show, because there's some charts and there's some graphs.
There's charts and graphs, but I wonder if you could describe what the charts and graphs
what the report focuses on in particular is measuring people's subjective well-being. So how happy people report themselves to be. And there are two components of that, basically. One is the overall life satisfaction in a more evaluative sense. So you ask people on a scale from 0 to 10, how satisfied with your life are you? And I think that's more the deeper happiness that that people that people think are really key. And then the second aspect is the more emotional mood aspect of happiness. So you ask people, how happy were you yesterday? How sad or upset or angry were you yesterday? And so
it seems kind of ephemeral, as opposed to hard economic statistics like steel production or something.
I mean,
You
sure.
know what I mean,
it's not the same as steel production, but I
that
think
doesn't mean it isn't meaningful.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. It may be more meaningful
Right.
than what we've been trying to do quantitatively.
Right. And so the polling is conducted by Gallup in the Gallup World Poll, but a lot of some governments have started to take this on and making it part of their census. And
Which ones, for instance?
The UK has started to measure this. My understanding is that France is considering measuring it. And the OECD has they released on the last International Day of Happiness on March 20th, a gigantic book called Guidelines for Measuring Subjective Well-Being.
Wow, is that generally available? Or
Yes,
is it
that's on the OECD
that's
website.
a huge thing. There's a great deal of discussion of this.
Oh, it's a
and what's the date?
panels.
What's the date? What's the date?
It was released March 20th, 2013.
That's the solstice. right?
Exactly, and
Equinox,
also
spring
the
equinox.
International Day of
Okay.
Happiness
Happiness.
that the UN has decreed. And
That's getting that term or that idea is getting around in policy areas.
Yes, absolutely.
And people that are taking that seriously.
yeah, the OECD has really done pioneering work on thinking through very rigorously how do you measure this, how do you deal with the statistics, how do you prevent bias in the questions, and so they have quite rigorous guidelines for it, and they're working closely with national statistical agencies to work with their statisticians.
And what
to
are the
figure out how to
findings?
measure
What
it.
are the or what are the trends that we can see, or what are the or what are the results of this effort in terms of measuring the human condition?
Well, I think one of the key results is that income and it matters to people, and their material conditions matter, especially in terms of, the poorest countries do tend to be the most unhappiness, which makes sense, but that income isn't everything. That basically there's a certain threshold at which your material needs do need to be met, but after that there are a lot of other factors that become more important to your happiness. So the United States, which per capita is, up at the very top, only ranked 17th in the World Happiness Report, below Panama, below Mexico, below Costa Rica. And so you have to think, what else is there? And so the report has, looks at other factors like social support. They ask people, do you feel that you have someone you could turn to in a time of need? They look at
sense of community,
a
lot of abstract
generosity and altruism, which benefits individuals and the people who they're altruistic towards. They look at the role of health. In this report, there's a fantastic chapter on mental health and the undiagnosed disease burden of mental health and some of the possible interventions that could be done quite cheaply. And so it's really, it's been a fascinating project for me to work on, and I think it's gained a lot of traction around the world as governments are starting to realize that there are ways to measure it, and it's important to think about what else contributes to human well-being.
Have there been critiques of that by, let's say, hardcore people who want facts, ma'am, kind of thing, that this is so ephemeral that it's almost as hard to measure as, say, art or something like that?
I think
it's
that
so
was
wishy-washy.
Right. I think that
is there
was
a lot is there criticism of the whole concept by hard scientists and so forth?
I mean, certainly there is. I would argue there are a lot of hard scientists who have contributed to the report in various ways.
Good.
From all sorts of disciplines. So I think there was understandably some skepticism towards the idea of the possibility of being able to measure and promote happiness. But I think even I think the UN meeting that Johnanne mentioned was a big turning point. I think these reports.
When was that? 12? Did you say?
April 2012.
Yeah. Okay, that's recent. That's just yesterday. Yeah.
Right. And then the following day they did a more academic.
Right. There was an academic workshop.
Columbia.
So I think that these reports have done a lot, and there have been some other good reports done. And I think now that you're really starting to engage with the statistical community, I've seen a huge trend, and this concept is really starting to be
do they have
accepted.
anything with the reporting in that? Do they have anything that comes out that purports or wants to use the findings or the statistics or the trends that can be seen that could be translated into policy?
Yep, there's a
Or
chapter.
do they make suggestions about how we can increase the happiness index of the world?
Yeah.
Or
Well, I
and what
think
are some of
that-
those suggestions, and how does it fit into a? Mr. Marx used to say, "From each according to his ability, each according to his need, not his reasonable wants, or whatever makes for happiness." You know, you know what I'm saying? That
Yeah.
fits into the old economic paradigm.
Right.
Is what I'm getting at. Suggested policies that would have effect in terms of those at the level of responsibility for the
Right.
operation of what Bucky called Spaceship Earth.
Right. Well,
An
I think
operating
that
manual.
I think that the measurement part is really key to that, because
Yeah, it's
unless
just
you
getting
can
started, maybe,
exactly,
yeah,
and
yeah,
then
yeah, yeah.
if you're
Mhm.
able to more accurately measure people's subjective well-being, then policymakers will be better able to evaluate whether or not their policies
How you
have
can
improved
encourage
well-being.
that makes for happiness.
Exactly.
Did
And
any of
then-
them question it at the level of just saying, well, happiness is so ephemeral, like they used to say for slaves? Those darkies are happy singing, slapping themselves down there on
Yeah.
in the cotton field. You
But
know,
that wasn't
somebody-
a slave. That was not a slave reporting their own well-being. That's someone else judging happiness from the outside. And
Well,
so
if you got people here judging, you got academics with all kinds
No,
of
because
tenured
the
degrees. and all
questions
kinds
that
of
they're
things like-
asking,
they're
they're-
all comfortable. The people making these movers, and you don't have the people
no,
participating.
you do, because
You
the
do.
data come from going around to people,
And the
surveying them,
question-
and saying, "How happy are you?"
Yeah,
It's
the
not-
questions are asked
yeah.
by the researchers who are all comfortably ensconced within an upper middle class context as a tenured position at a university.
that
and
doesn't
all
mean
that,
they're not-
You know.
Yeah.
So it's
but-
hard for them to be part of the people who are. You've got 4%.
But it's a pretty clear, it's a pretty, they're asking just for a number, on a scale of
Yeah.
0 to 10, how happy are you? I think it's one of the most direct ways of getting to people's happiness you could
Okay,
have.
that's
When
very
you
good.
ask
I'm
them-
all
yeah.
for it. I think it's great. But
Harold?
now you've got to think, if I may, okay, but you got to think now, the people. The people of the world are just voicing, I think Congress has an approval rating of 4%. The government, the executive branch has something like that. The corporations and the banks have even less. And they do studies by people who say everybody's happy, and they're not. Are there ways to measure unhappiness with the system that's in place? Is this a way of co-opting the inadequacy of the systems that are being reified by our leadership? Intellectual or political is what I'm saying.
That's a big mouthful, but
Yeah.
I think that
Nobody's
this last week here
Yeah.
in New York was extraordinary time.
this last week.
This past week that we just had here, just in New York, where we're sitting right now. The passing of Nelson Mandela, of course, was dominating the airwaves. But the other thing that was, and the people that have known him, the people that have been inspired by him, were on the air hour after hour, day
Yeah.
after day, which was good because if you had a chance to look at any of it, you were able to learn a lot of things about him you might never have known. But simultaneously, the fast food workers all over North America went out and were demonstrating. And the issue was, because I think the bottom line that finally started to come out of the discussions of the passing of Nelson Mandela were basically the ever increasing income inequality, the economic apartheid, as it were, all across the planet, is growing.
Yeah.
And so while we're talking about Nelson Mandela, we're also covering, and God bless MSNBC, NBC Universal, some of these media that actually were willing to dig down and look at these numbers. And so they're talking about federal minimum wage, $725. You cannot live in New York City, 8-hour job at $7.25 as a single person, much less living with 4 other people, much less if you're supporting a family. And so we started to really talk more in, quote, mainstream media about things you've been talking about all along for years. So that's a little breakthrough that's happening, but what will we do as a planetary population, as planetary citizens, in shifting this? So I wanted to, so the indices begin to give us a handle on how
No,
we're
it's a good idea.
consuming,
It's a good
how
idea.
we're consuming, what we're consuming, and what needs to happen in planetary stewardship of the resources that the Earth makes available to all the planetary citizens on the Earth. Doesn't mean they have access to the tools. Binary economics talks about that ownership and access of the tools,
Well,
capital investment, and so on. I'd love to mention that.
Tools,
at the end,
access to capital ownership.
That's right.
Yeah.
So,
Which is very narrowly held. It has been. The assets are always
but does
narrowly
that
held.
need to be, I mean, part of what we see happening is that the youth all over the planet don't see hope. They don't see future. They can't get jobs. The automation
But the
of
World
tools.
Happiness Report reports something else? Or what are the trends that they
Let me
report?
finish my thought.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you. So, beginning to have some indices and some numbers on various things, beginning to combine them from other disciplines that can show other things. For instance, how we recycle what we take out of the body of the planet of the Earth. How do we recycle metals? Core things like iron, special metals, rare earth metals that are at the heart of our cell phone and information communication technology.
China has a lot.
Right. And we actually have some in California that not many people know about. So the Earth has been very gracious in providing in a distributed way. I worked for 3 years with something called the Earth Science for Society Initiative. It came out of a visionary thinker named Dr. Eduardo de Mulder. You and I did a program on that. We tried very hard to make contact with the Earth Institute, and we were not successful, unfortunately. But it was 500,000 Earth scientists, everything from heliophysicists, astrophysicists, hydrologists, geologists, which is a whole range of both exploitation geology and urban geologists, which Dr. de Mulder was, how you site a city, how you survey for what kind of carrying capacity the crust of the Earth has for what kinds of facilities.
Yeah.
And so that was a postdoctoral course for me, working with that Earth Sciences for Society initiative. The purpose of that was to raise awareness for more policymakers of the very new science called Earth Science. It's less than 2 decades old.
Earth science.
Earth Science.
I did my doctoral work in geography.
Exactly.
They don't even have geography anymore.
Hardly.
Not in
Harvard
America.
doesn't have it.
No.
They don't have it because you know why? I've always been, if I may, I don't mean
Please,
to interrupt.
no, this is
It's just
dynamic.
personal. I've always been interested in everything. I think there should be a department at the university of everything, rather than all the reductionist because what they do, interested in everything, and you can get away with it. It'd be in geography because it could be soils, climate, geopolitics, historical, economic, whatever. And people say, what the hell's the point? There's no point because there's nothing you can do except breaking everything down into specializations is what informs all of the peer review things and all of the tenured positions and everything like that. And they have who was it that said they co-opt, the British would divide and conquer. They've divided and conquered the intellectual community away from systems thinking.
Well, whoever said it.
Systems thinking is so absurd. It's so absurd to think certain things because nobody can it's so complicated. You have to get specialized, and that's also the way people get money.
Well,
you get money is made available to people who specialize on something rather than people who are thinking comprehensive. There's no reason.
Well,
It's
Earth
ipso
Institute-
facto absurd to think
The
along
Earth
those terms.
Institute is making efforts. It's at
Yeah.
the core
Well, I guess
of the
maybe,
Earth
but you have to
Institute
go against the grain.
Yeah.
Well, and
But that's
And the
I mean,
government.
someone has to start.
somebody has to.
Someone
start.
has to start doing it.
Somebody
so.
has to be the trim tab. So God bless Columbia University for having
Yeah,
the wisdom
right.
to
And
do
you,
this.
dear. Yeah. Good for you. Yeah,
Yes.
that's it. But I mean, it's.
So let me just define.
Oh,
it.
go ahead. I'm sorry. You had
Okay.
a soliloquy
Yes,
there.
you
Go ahead, yeah.
mentioned that divide and conquer, and you mentioned the British colonial imperialism. But actually, before that ever existed, somebody, I recall somewhere, said that the real work of evil and the devil is divide and conquer. So we have a long evolutionary human condition
From the
trend.
beginning of coming out
But
of
you
the
know
cave.
what?
I mean, it's been that. yeah.
Connectivity, cameras, different things.
Mobile phones.
Mobile phones, I was just about to say, are allowing
Particularly
the
smartphones.
opportunity,
Yeah.
yes, to transform not only human consciousness, but the dynamics of everything.
Right.
So there is hope on the horizon. There is hope.
Yeah.
Whether happiness can be as an indices, well-being as an indices, as
That's
a
interesting.
kind of a dynamic,
Yeah,
an evolutionary dynamic, can
uh-huh.
work as part of the work that we're all doing and why
Good,
we're here
yeah.
today together.
Yeah.
So I wanted to mention something else, for instance.
And these things are very well worth encouraging and supporting, yeah.
And hopefully moving them out so that the younger generation, which is right on the precipice of not seeing hope for the future, they go through all the trouble of getting their PhDs and their masters and whatever education, and then they're
They're burdened with debt.
if they're lucky enough to get a $7.25 an hour job. So we're going to have to radically rethink what economy means, what financial markets mean, and how they work and how they're regulated. And we've had actually the blessing of the economic meltdown, because it did show us. I was up at Columbia University within weeks of that for an event with Jeffrey Sachs, George Soros, and Rubini, who'd been a prophet
Yeah.
of that meltdown. And so
2008?
Professor Sachs was his thesis advisor.
really?
Yeah.
You're talking about 2008? Like?
That was I believe within a month or two of the big crash.
The 3-page thing with Mr. Paulson saying you have to sign this and have it on the president's desk by the end of the year or the end of the week, or everything's going to fall apart, and they did.
Yeah.
You're brilliantly well informed. So the point is that there are people of true goodwill, true good intent. I mean, part of what everybody talks about who has observed Mr. Sachs in action is, when does he sleep? Does he ever sleep? I've had people tell me, well, he's mastered sleeping in the car on the way to the airport. Often if he's flying around the world with the people that he actually travels with, there probably isn't much time because they're planning this and moving for that. But there are many, many people all over the planet, including you, who really are committed to see transformation. I remember being in the UN a couple of years ago when Obama gave his first speech at the UN, and he literally had the courage to use the word transformation, which I had never heard used at the UN at that time.
You
in
hadn't?
his speech.
Yeah.
In his speech.
Hmm.
He wasn't the first, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But in that pioneering speech, he did, and that is and transformation means change of form.
Well,
And
there's...
we have to change everything, the way we think.
Well,
the way
wait a
our
minute. Everything is
institutions
a
work.
lot. And also, there's also quantitative change. And we've been evolving our species for 200,000 years. Did you see that they got the in Georgia? They found Homo erectus. So I've been saying inappropriately that we came out of Homo habilis. And we were apparently from Homo erectus 1.8 million years ago. But anyway,
Georgia meaning the former Soviet.
Yeah, Soviet Union.
Right.
They found a thing, and it was Homo erectus, from which we are immediately descended. So we appear about 200,000 years ago. We got 10,000 generations, and we're just got this unique capability, and we may be coming to a point of doing ourselves in. We have weapon systems that the Tridents alone. I think the Tridents alone have enough firepower to wipe out the entire species, unlike any time in human history. We've always been protected.
And it runs around underwater?
Yeah,
Yes.
the atomic fleet. I got the. They've got
Which everyone's forgotten about.
Yeah, they got them, and they can. They've got these super weapons that are just. And I don't know how many there are. Sarah Flounders and
Sure.
Ramsey Clark have it down cold.
Sure.
And it's just we've got that capability that's brand new after 10,000 generations. After
So-
civilization, 10,000 years ago, there's always been some emperor sitting there, and everybody else wallowing around in the mud, doing what they're told, like slaves. Slavery came in.
Even the managers who think they're well paid. So
And then you get kings in the castle, and then the people are wallowing around in the mud. And now you got bankers and things like that. And it's all based upon, the assumption that is based upon, and economics is referred to as, the allocation of scarce resources. There's not enough. There's not nearly enough. For one to win, somebody else has to lose. And the basis of political power and so-called legitimacy is who's got the biggest club. It's called realpolitik. It's still operative. And we've got all these institutions we've inherited out of history that are based upon a context of capability that has been transcended qualitatively, not quantitative, not another tax cut or another democratic Republican shift of power within a state or something, a qualitative thing that can only begin to be seen almost in evolutionary terms.
So what do you
We
think
may be coming to the end of the Homo sapien era
What do you
in
think-
evolutionary terms in universe.
What do you
Nobody
think that
brings
shift-
it up.
Harold, what do you think that shift would be?
Well, you can't know because the universe and everything in it is synergetic. Its behavior system's unpredicted temporally by the sum of the parts. There's something more than the sum of the parts that we can't know. Nothing's absolute. There's no absolutes or anything, so we don't know what it would be. We didn't know what it was going to be when we made the transition to Eve 200,000 years ago. That was something new.
Yeah,
So we're coming to something new on an evolutionary scale. So all of our institutions are virtually out of date
No, well, but
with
many
the capability of being able to have a system which recognizes at a material level, the other ephemeral things would follow. Material is the dialectical materialism. So that we have transcended as an ontologic collective reality scarcity itself. There is enough with
There
good
is.
design.
There is.
Now you can't get
With
people to
good
understand
design.
that
Right.
because all the basis of the institutions is based upon competition of scarcity,
Okay, so
and that's what motivates the whole process.
So I feel your frustration and I feel your dedication of having done that homework where you could even articulate that. But what do you think?
Well, I was going to say it's clearly a tremendous challenge, but I think that a framework to move towards would be the Sustainable Development Framework.
Yeah.
So something that my boss Jeffrey Sachs and scientists at
right.
the Earth Institute have worked on is they started a new initiative last year under the auspices of the Secretary General called the Sustainable Development Solutions Network. And the idea is to work with governments, to work with corporations, to work with leading scientists, academics all over the world to find sustainable development solutions. And Johnanne is pulling out now
Oh, we got another study.
another report to show.
Okay, can you define us what is sustainable development? What do we mean when we talk about
Yeah,
it?
so there are 3 pillars of sustainable development underpinned by a 4th. So economic prosperity, social inclusion to make sure the prosperity is shared in by all groups, including minorities, and then environmental sustainability. And then that has to be underpinned by good governance as well of governments, of the public sector and the private sector.
Right.
And so the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, that's the report they delivered to the
Yeah.
Secretary General.
Okay, good,
But
yeah.
the idea is to have a global network of people working on these challenges and trying to find things we can actually do. Because
Yeah.
I think everyone's frustrated, everyone can see the problems. Finding the solutions are obviously much, much harder, but so the network is working on the global scale, but it's also working with regional networks. So last summer we did a launch of a Mediterranean regional network, so countries from North Africa and from Greece, from Italy, to work on challenges like pollution in the Mediterranean basin.
Yeah.
There we were just at the launch of the Southeast Asia regional network, and then
Good.
there are also national networks too. So
Yeah.
there's an Ethiopian national network, there's a South Korean national network, and so everyone's working together to think of work on the global level and then go to the regional, to the national, to work together on the solutions facing whatever your community is.
And does that call for certain energy policies, and how are we going to get the energy?
Yeah, one of
does it
the-
come for any big thinking like you were talking about, like Bucky at
Absolutely.
World Game? And we're heading for an urban environment. Apparently, we're going to be 90% of the population of the world going to be in urban. There are going to be tremendous needs for electricity. There's going to be
Exactly.
tremendous needs for resources. The resources were all
Yeah.
there when we came out of the cave.
Right.
We had a liaison with them. Is there any hope in the term trim tap ephemeralization, doing more with less
That was a key
through
button,
good
too.
design? You got the nanotechnologies just over the
Right.
horizon. Nanotubes. You're going to have building materials that weigh nothing and have the 10,000
Right.
strength of steel. There's things that are
Right.
coming. The
No, there's-
microchip.
Yeah, the
fact
technology
that
gives
things
tremendous
we can do
possibilities.
more with less.
Or with just
And-
new technologies, not that are
Okay.
able smarts. There's a working group on sustainable cities that are working on ways to have more smart metering, to have electric taxis,
Exactly.
to have all sorts technology. See what technology can do to help transform the way we interact and to end the environmental ramifications.
Absolutely right. And you
Yeah.
know, the thing is going, I told you before, the big thing they had on Science Channel is the biggest development in the history of mankind is the smartphone.
Right.
And things are moving exponentially.
And it's
not
just a
hyperbolic.
technological leapfrogging.
Yeah.
Because people start off with a smartphone now in some places.
And it's not only information technology we can see with there's Moore's law, and it's going faster than Moore's law now, but
Right.
it's also now the robotics. The robotics are coming. Practically everything is being produced by a robotic information technology capability that don't need people.
Right.
The labor theory of value that informs practically all economic theorizing. The only way they have to distribute buying power to the people is for them to have a job on the estate where all the assets are producing the wealth are owned by a tiny plutocratic class, and they don't have a way of setting up a new way to form capital or distribute demand in a way that can bring freedom to the people, because their role as wage slaves is being undercut by the very technological means of success.
Right.
And we don't have it at a
So
policy level.
So
We don't have political leadership or intellectual leadership at a policy level that
we
we
do.
require.
I hope
Where
that that's
is
what we're
it?
trying to provide is some
Yes.
of the intellectual leadership, at least, to provide the science, the ideas, the practical policy suggestions, so that when the public and when governments and policymakers are debating what type of energy system should a country have
Yeah.
in the next to 2050,
Yeah.
that there's the rigorous scientific plan so that policymakers can say, here are our options, here are the pros
Right.
and cons of all of them, and
Yeah.
then have an informed debate with
Wonderful.
the citizenry.
That's what we need, an
Yeah.
informed debate, and like Buckminster Fuller's world game kind of idea that was there it should be there on the it should be all up on the
Right.
table.
So what-
and there
what
should be
came
things
out
up on the
Right.
table that are lacking, and you're providing that, and I thank you for that. Yeah.
what came out of Rio Plus 20 was what I called the banner, the big banner, which was the world we want. And to me, the implication of that with the smartphones,
Yeah.
etc., is that collectively, really collectively, in a connected planetary culture, we can create and design, through technology, through ethics and caring, a new planetary culture. We may never have had this kind of connectivity and opportunity before,
Ever.
ever.
Yeah.
So that we remember. So,
Ever.
well, there are the people that say there was an Atlantis and so on. But let me just mention
We only
this.
got 30 seconds
Okay.
left.
Lastly,
Haiku.
Haiku. Okay, haiku. So I want to mention Fashion for Development,
quick,
which is
quick.
an initiative, but also something called globalcitizens.org,
Okay.
which is a
Global.
movement to get a lot of other people through the arts, through music, big concerts in the park,
Okay.
and so on, to participate.
Okay, good. Well, listen, we could go on talking, we have, and everything. Your pleasure to have the perceptions. My dear friend Johnanne Winchester, my newly emerging friend, is Claire Bulger, I hope,
Yep.
and all the good people at the Institute. Thanks a lot for viewing. We'll be coming back again tomorrow. All the best to you and all the work and everything like that, and really happy to meet with you and
Happy to be here.
share
Thank
the
you.
program. Thank you for viewing. We'll be coming back again tomorrow. That's it. I think we can go to black now, and thank you very much for coming in.
Thanks so much. This was
Okay.
fun.